Good morning, everyone. Welcome to today's hearing. Today we're going to continue hearing evidence from Miss Joanne Smith of the London Fire Brigade. So would you ask Miss Smith to come in, please? Good morning, Miss Smith.
Good morning, sir.
Right, ready to carry on, I hope.
Yes, thank you.
Good, thank you. Yes, Mr. Phillips.
Yes, Mr. Chairman. Good morning to you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, members of the panel, to you. Good morning, Miss Smith. Miss Smith, before I begin, can I just ask you, please, to keep your answers a little bit shorter and focus on the question? Looking at the transcript yesterday, it was apparent that some of your answers got a little bit longer than perhaps was strictly necessary. So if I could ask you, please, to try to do that, that would be very helpful to us. I would like to ask you some questions next about the Grenfell House Board and its meeting on the 15th of September 2010. Last night we were in 2010 and we were looking at the development of the training packages. Can we go, please, to LFB 000-55192? And this is a note of the meeting which you and Scott Hayward attended, as you can see from page 1 and the list of attendees there. If you go to paragraph 5.4 at the foot of the page, under post actions, you can see that it says, FSG training has been reviewed to ensure it fully aligns with 1093, subject to recommendations made to CLG. All control staff have now received refresher training in FSG. Did you or Scott Hayward provide that update?
Yes, we must have.
Yes. Did you or Scott Hayward tell the Grenfell House Board that the FSG training you were delivering did not, in fact, fully align with 1093?
No, we didn't.
Do you accept that you may have given them the impression that it did when it didn't?
No, I think we believed that the training we were providing and that we'd witnessed aligned with the recommendations we'd made in 1093.
But we saw yesterday that there was some lack of alignment, wasn't there, thus far?
Yes, I think, and apologies, I think I might have got confused. You showed me the presentation for the new entrance training yesterday, and that wouldn't have been the document and the presentation that Scott and I and Tim Cutbill and John Bradbury reviewed, because that was for new entrants. We would have reviewed the refresher training.
So there's a different set of packages, is there, for refreshers?
Yes.
Right.
So we would have just commented and had a presentation on what training team intended to roll out for the refresher training. And I hadn't seen the new entrants training.
Right. So help me. The reason I put what I put to you yesterday as the subject of your review was because the document was generated in June. FSG call handling, you'll remember the presentation, had the file date of the 24th of June on it, 2010.
Yes.
Which would have been after the new entrance training in the March of 2010 and before your 2nd of July review.
Yes.
Put that to you yesterday.
I understand, but I must have, there were two presentations and we wouldn't have ever reviewed the new entrance training. I had no involvement in new entrance training.
You had no involvement in new entrance training. Are you able to explain why you were reviewing a package dated the 24th of June or the 2nd of July if it didn't relate to refresher training?
I'm sure, I believe the package we reviewed, the one that we all attended and was delivered, was for the proposed refresher training in the September 2010.
All right. Well, let's see how we go, because we may be able to identify that in the course of your evidence. But let's go over to page 2, paragraph 5.5. A full day of refresher training has been introduced, half of which is delivered by the fire safety team. Role play has also been introduced. The FSG reference information file has been reworked to complement the FSG training package. LFB training came to audit control training team. They recommended introducing role play on a number of call types. It's also recommended to introduce supervisory training package of 2 weeks, similar to the CM package. This would include a Minerva type exercise. Now, looking at those minutes, you were aware, were you, that the board had been given assurances that a full day of refresher training had been introduced? half of which was to be delivered by the fire safety team, yes?
Yes,
Was that the FSG training?
that was the FSG refresher training for all staff.
Right. Can we just go back to the bottom of 5.4 then? Bottom of page 1 and look at paragraph 5.4 in light of what you've just told us. You say FSG training has been reviewed to ensure it fully aligns with 1093, subject to recommendations made to CLG. The minute doesn't draw the distinction between FSG training for new entrants and FSG training for existing staff, does it?
No,
No. And therefore, would you accept that the at least on the basis of this minute, the Lakenal House Board would fairly have understood that all FSG training, whether for new entrants or for existing staff, had been reviewed to ensure that it fully aligns with 1093?
possibly.
Yes. So when that was said, do you remember whether anybody said to the Lakenal House Board that the new entrants training does not fully align with 1093?
No, I don't recall that. I
Right.
just think we would have given an update to say that we had moved the new entrance training later in the weeks, and then we would have talked heavily about refresher training. So it just would have been implied that we were talking about refresher training, I think, and maybe the minute doesn't cover that.
Did you see this minute after it was circulated for approval?
Possibly. I can't recall.
Would you have had an opportunity to correct it before it was finalised, given that you were one of the attendees at the meeting and had reported?
Yes, I think we both would have looked at it and changed it if we didn't feel that it had been a fair representation.
Right. When you looked at it, did you not notice that there was no distinction drawn in paragraph 5.4 between FSG training for new entrants, which did not fully align with 1093, and FSG training for existing staff, which you say did?
No, but maybe that's because the conversation in the meeting had been clear on that, and just the minute isn't.
Right. Given that you say, as you've told us just now, that you didn't review the training package for new entrants, but did for refresher training, did anybody tell you before this meeting that the FSG training for new entrants complied with or fully aligned with 1093?
No, but OST would have worked on both, so they were working on the refresher training, so we would have seen that, and I would have expected them to update the new entrants training. They, as a matter of course, they spend a number of weeks prior to any new entrant starting, updating all the training, because obviously there's been a lot of changes since we have new entrants in, so they spend a considerable amount of time prior to a new entrance to make sure that all the training aligns. So maybe it was in a time when we didn't have any new entrants, and they would have updated that as soon as we had a new course starting. But sorry, I was going to say I had no involvement in new entrants training.
You had no involvement in new entrants training. Nonetheless, we covered this to some extent yesterday, did you make sure that those who were in charge of reviewing and designing the new entrants training at this point, September 2010, or between March and September 2010, had the gap analysis and were told to ensure that the training did align fully with 1093?
No, I wasn't responsible for training or new entrants delivery, and I can't imagine they wouldn't have had the gap analysis and been part of our meetings where we shared what we had discovered from the Lakenal board.
You say you can't imagine it, and I can understand why you say that, but do you remember it?
No.
Can I then turn to the Lakenal House Board meeting of the 8th of November 2010, LFB 30840032. Again, we can see that you were present, along with Scott Hayward. And if you go to the foot of page 1, paragraph 4.6, Action point 12, it says, refresher training. The bulk of this is complete. Training has been completed for any staff on sick, etc., when the original training was carried out. The computer-based training package for 2011 is now being formulated. Every other year, the full package will be used with the refresher CBT course in between. All training records have been transferred onto STEP. So, did this include the training that we looked at yesterday, which you had reviewed, or not?
Yes, I believe so.
And if we look at page 5, please, we have the action plan, and we can look at actions 11 and 12. We'll come to examine action 12 in a little bit more detail later, but if you go to page 5, which is the start of the action plan, and then turn to page 6, 11 is FSG initial training, as you can see from the top of the screen, ACSD, 15/9/10, 15th of September 2010, initial training on FSG is now provided later in induction training, yes. And then refresher training, 15/10, refresher training provided to all control staff, consideration being given to how this is completed in future years. It may include computer-based training and STEP records. 8/11/10, that's the date of the meeting, CBT package being formulated for alternate years, all training records now transferred to STEP. Now, at that point in time, in respect to the initial training, do we take it to mean that it had been completed?
The initial refresher training.
The initial training, no, 11.
That it had moved to later on in the training, I believe so.
Yes. And in respect of refresher training, we can see what's been said. It says provided to all control staff. Does that mean that it had by then been provided to all control staff?
Yes, possibly. I would imagine there's probably an outstanding number because they were absent that we would needed to catch up on. But again, I wasn't involved in the rollout of refresher training at that time.
Now, at that point in time, do you know how training was meant to be monitored?
No, I don't. I believe OST kept a database and added the staff that attended sessions onto the database.
Yes. Now, you may remember, we can see it if you like, but in your gap analysis, it's at page 23 of the document, you had raised this point and said that FSG refresher training should be given to all control staff and monitor this via training database to ensure that it took place at consistent periods. We can go to it if you like, but do you remember that's what it said?
I don't recall the exact wording, but I'll take your word for it.
Well, no, let's look at it then. LFB 404750, page 23. And if you look at the right-hand column, second paragraph, it says exactly that. Introduce FSG refresher training to all control staff and monitor this via training database to ensure this takes place at consistent periods. Now, on that basis, when you conducted your review on the 2nd of July 2010, as we've seen from the emails, did you also look at that? Did you look at monitoring via the database?
No, I didn't.
Did you look at it at any other time in 2010?
No, I didn't, but I can imagine that would have been an action that Scott Hayward and Lindsay Turner would have dealt with.
Right. Do you know why you didn't look at this in 2010?
Because I wasn't in charge of training or involved in its delivery.
What was the plan for monitoring training via the training database at that point?
I don't know. I was on the periphery of some discussions about STEP and transferring it, and I'm not sure if this refers to our internal database or to the STEP database. I had minimal involvement in that. All I know is from just overhearing some discussions.
I see. And who was in charge?
I think Scott Hayward and Lindsay Turner would have dealt with that. It was an action from SM Kelly's report as well.
Now let's look at a refresher training action 12 in a little bit more detail if we can. We've just seen how it was reported to the Lachenal Board in November 2010. Can we look at the Lachenal Assurance Report, please, in 2018 at LFB 404801 and go to page 14, right-hand column, action 12. As you can see, and in red it says, establish a recurring programme of fire survival guidance FSG refresher training in accordance with the national guidance for all control personnel. And then it goes on, the national guidance, Fire Service Circular 1093, training of fire control staff, promotes continuation training, which it describes as further continuation training should be carried out progressively with the aim of improving skills and knowledge gradually. The guidance also recommended that on-watch refresher training should be given to all fire control staff on a systematic basis, i.e. it should be both scheduled and monitored. National guidance recommends that refresher training should be delivered no more than every 12 months. First, do you agree with that statement about the 1993 guidance?
Yes.
And let's look at it. LFB 403617, please, page 3. And can we look at paragraph 11 at the top of your screen, watch refresher training. It is recommended that on-watch refresher training should be given to all fire control staff on a systematic basis, i.e. it should be both scheduled and monitored. The subject matter will depend on local circumstances, but emphasis should be given to little-used procedures or areas of weakness. It is recommended that brigade training officers should be encouraged to participate in the training to augment the efforts of fire control officers. Do you agree that FSG would be a little-used procedure, given the infrequency of FSG calls received by control, at least as at 2010?
I do.
You do. Would you agree that after Lakanal it was plain that at the LFB it was certainly an area of weakness because of the experience at Lakanal?
Yes.
Now, in respect of FSG training, if we look at your witness statement, page 21, please, paragraph 53, you say this, and this is the question, how the refresher training was delivered in practice between 2011 and 2017. You break it up into periods in your statement. Your first period is refresher training 2010 to 2012. The details of FSG training and development of the training packages from 2010 to 2012 are set out above, insofar as this information is within my knowledge. As noted in my response to question 11A, there was a full review of FSG training following the gap analysis and update to policy number 539, and there was a complete rollout of FSG training, refresher training, to all CROs. The intention was to roll this out as face-to-face training at first, and then to deliver the training in the subsequent year via a CBT package. This structure would then alternate between 1 year in person and then 1 year via CBT. And then you say you left for the CFOA in 2012, as we know. Would you agree that the Lakanal House Board was told that this was going to be the training package that was put in place, as you've described it here?
Yes.
Yeah. Now, if we look at the minutes of the Lakanal House Board meeting of the 22nd of June 2010, so just stepping back a little bit earlier into 2010 than where we were, LFB 3055208. This is a meeting of that date. You can see that Scott Hayward was present, but you were not present. We can't see your name in the list. You see that?
Yes.
But you also don't send an apology. Is that because you were not at that stage a regular attendee at this meeting?
That might be entirely possible. I don't know when, I can't recall the date when Scott Hayward asked me to comment and become involved in the gap analysis, so maybe this is prior to my joining the Lakanal Board.
Right. Well, the gap analysis has been completed at latest by April 2010, but as we've seen from earlier documents, probably around, or possibly around the February mark of that year, and we've seen that you were present at the 15th of September 2010 Lakanal House Board meeting. But either way, you can't explain or can you explain your absence from this meeting?
No, I agree with you that maybe I wasn't a regular attendee.
Right.
Until September.
Would you have read the minutes? I say, would you have? At that time, was it your practice to have been provided with the minutes of the Lakanal House Board meetings?
No.
Right. Now, was it Scott Hayward's practice to report to you what had happened at those meetings so far as concerns control?
No.
Let's look at page 3, paragraph 8.7. And at 8.7 it says, Annual refresher training, in line with FSC 1093, is being planned, and the expectation is that all control staff will receive a biannual one-day refresher with the training team and an on-watch package, including an e-learning package from fire safety and confirmation of learning. Were you aware of that assurance being given to the board at that time?
No, I was just aware of the plan to undertake a day's refresher training every other year, and that would be complemented by a CBT package in the alternate years.
I see. Was it your understanding that it would be a full day every year, at least every year?
Yes.
Yes. And do you know what was meant by the on-watch package, including the e-learning package from fire safety?
I believe that's what the CBT package was.
And would that include a slideshow or presentation or PowerPoint created by fire safety?
I believe so. I would only know that because I was asked to comment on the formulation of the CBT packages when we were working on them in early 2012. So I believe they did include a presentation by fire safety.
A presentation by fire safety, designed by fire safety and delivered by fire safety?
No, designed by fire safety and then to be done as part of the CBT e-learning package.
I see. Now let's look at the minutes of the Lacknell House Board meeting on the 15th of September, which we saw just a few moments ago earlier in your evidence. LFB 3055192. And I've already read this to you at page 2, paragraph 5.5. It says a full day of refresher training has been introduced, half of which is delivered by the fire safety team. Role play has also been introduced. Do you recall any discussion or comments about the refresher training at that meeting?
I don't know.
Was the intention that the full day of refresher training would be delivered on an annual basis?
No, it was always put to the board that it would be a full day every other year, delivered by trainers and fire safety, and the CBT package would be rolled out in alternate years.
And the CBT, I thought you'd said earlier that the CBT package learning would also be a day. Is that right, or is that
no? Apologies. I think that was just that the CBT packages would be available, and every other year control staff would undertake those.
Was it intended that the fire safety team would deliver half of the refresher training annually?
No, that they would deliver when we had the refresher training, the full day refresher training with our trainers. They would attend to deliver their presentations.
So
and the CBT package every other year would just be the presentation that they'd designed.
I see. So just to be clear, at this point, the intention going forward was that there would be alternate years, teacher-led training for a full day, and CBT learning from the E package in off years, so 2011, 13, 15.
Yes.
And on the on years, the even-numbered years, half of the teacher-led training would be delivered by the fire safety team.
Yes.
So not just designed by the fire safety team, but actually delivered by them.
Yes.
Yes, thank you. Was it intended that role play would be practiced as part of the full day of refresher training in the even years?
Yes.
Was it intended that role play would be practiced as part of the CBT at that stage?
No, I don't believe so.
Let's then go to the Latinal Control Report of November 2012 at HOM 401124, or actually let's look at the version at LFB 404724. Either will do, but I prefer the LFB reference, please. And if we go in that, please, to page 52, you can see recommendation 4 at the foot of the page, foot of your screen. And it says, with regard to fire survival guidance training, specifically this should be reviewed to more fully reflect national guidance and current fire safety advice. and any specific issues arising from the gap analysis included in this report. This should include a review of training for 1. Recruits, 2. Control officers, continuation / refresher training, 3. Supervisors. And if we turn over to page 53, action 4.2, completed, it says, a programme of refresher / continuation training was implemented for all in-post COs between May and August 2010. Continuation training is provided annually to all control staff over a 2-year cycle, with Year 1 being a trainer-led course and Year 2 being a computer-based training course. The training includes A. Role play to ensure confirmation of learning was introduced into training. This allows all new and existing staff to experience a number of FSG call scenarios in a safe, supportive environment. B. Inputs from Brigade fire safety officers covering aspects of building design and construction coupled with current fire safety advice to educate COs on fire behaviour and building types. C. FSG training has been extended to encompass whole day training. You see that?
Yes.
Now, why did you think that CBT training was appropriate without role play, given the national guidance recommended role play?
I didn't. If you're asking me, we had some conversations. I didn't believe CBT training. I wasn't keen on using CBT packages.
Did you express your lack of keenness to anybody?
Yes, I think in our group that everyone knew that I wasn't too keen on that.
Who was that?
Scott and Lindsay.
Scott and Lindsay. What did you do, can you remember, to press the point, to try to insist that role play should be included, not only in the teacher-led years, but also in the CBT packages?
I'm not sure it was specific to role play. I just didn't think that CBT packages would be that beneficial. So it wasn't specific for, I didn't have the issue with the role play not being included in it. It was just the CBT in general.
Right. Are you able to explain why those who compiled this report did not say that there was no role play in Year 2, which was CBT?
No, like I say, in day one, the report, the Lakanal House Assurance report, the one that I worked on, didn't have any of these recommendations and actions completed, so I didn't even see a copy to comment on them.
So you can't explain how it came about that this report said what it said about role play?
No.
Would you agree with me that it is inaccurate and misleading to that extent?
Yes.
Yes. Let's look, please, at your witness statement. Slightly different point, but let's go to your statement, please. Page 18, paragraph 44. You say there that in the four lines down from the top of the paragraph, halfway through, it says, it was envisaged that going forward, due to the difficulties of pulling control staff from the watch for training, that this would be delivered in the subsequent year via CBT package, and then it would alternate going forward between 1 year in person and then 1 year via CBT. Now, I just want to ask you about what you mean by difficulties of pulling control staff from the watch for training. What were those difficulties that you encountered when pulling control staff from the watch for training?
So just with, this is a problem with fire control rooms nationally, that the ability, the control rooms are staffed for dealing with operations on a day-to-day basis, and there's very little movement for then removing staff to undertake training. That was one of the big proposals when we moved to the new shift pattern, that it gave us 4 hours with additional staff to be able to complete some of this training. But that's an inherent problem with all fire control rooms struggling to release resources into a training environment while operations continue, because unlike fire stations, as I'm sure you've heard, we can't just go off the run to undertake this training.
Were you ever involved in a discussion about any alternative methods for training staff in a way that would alleviate those difficulties?
Yes, so as I've mentioned, we explored different shift patterns to allow that to happen. And when I was asked to put together a plan for the implementation of the new vision system, we needed to provide control staff a number of hours training on the new system, and that was delivered using staff that came in off duty.
Right. So you could, is this right, pull together a plan when it came to the implementation of the new vision system and give control staff training, as it were, off the run? It's not perhaps an appropriate expression for the control room, but not on duty, put it that way. Yes?
Yes, well, the vision system was absolutely, if they hadn't have had training on the vision system, they wouldn't have been any use to us because they wouldn't have known how to use the system.
Yeah.
So that was given as a priority to me when I returned from CFOA.
When they had the vision system training, were they actually on duty or were they off duty?
I think because it was so delayed, some then caught up off duty, on duty, and then we had to deliver more refresher training on watch. But I think the majority of it in the initial between March maybe 2015 onwards, they were off watch.
If it were possible, as you've just explained, to arrange shift patterns so as to be able to provide training on the vision system for control staff off duty, why wasn't it also possible to do the same thing for control staff by way of refresher training for FSG?
Well, it could have been. Yes.
It could have been.
Yes.
Did you ever go to anybody, Scott Hayward or any of your seniors, and say to them that you wanted to have a plan, please, whereby your control room officers and indeed supervisors received refresher training off duty in the same way that they had received it for the vision system?
Not specifically, but I would have always talked about maintaining staffing levels or boosting staffing levels so we could achieve what we needed to achieve, operations in the control room and then training.
Isn't that a bit generic? I mean, a general complaint about staffing levels is not going to be as persuasive as saying to your seniors that on an FSG call, your control room staff are in effect the first responders, and therefore refresher training for FSG specifically is an absolute priority. So please can I arrange things in the same way that we did for Vision so that they get their refresher training?
So I think when I was in charge of training from 2015 and dealing with the Vision mobilising system, after that I would have said that. I don't think anyone can say that I didn't believe that FSG refresher training was a priority every year for control staff.
No, I take that point, but did you actually make that argument, the one I've just sketched out to you, to Scott Hayward or any other senior person?
When we first started it rolling out, although I wasn't in charge of training, yes, I would have verbalised that.
And what was their response?
I think both Lindsay and Scott agreed.
And what did they do about it? Or what did Scott Hayward do about it?
I don't know. I would imagine he would have spoken to AC Brown or AC George.
Did you chase him up? Did there come a time when you realised that nothing had been done and say to him, look, I've asked you this some time ago, my control room staff are not getting the refresher training on a regular basis, so they should be getting it because of these difficulties you've identified here?
No, like I say, I wasn't in charge of training at that time. I had been involved in the Lacanau board, and I was also heavily involved in delivering the National Coordination Centre into control, which involved its own amount of training and set up of a new team. So, no, I didn't pursue that.
Now, I want to ask you next about the teacher-led training sessions. We saw that the refresher training, which was going to be trainer-led, was envisaged to be a full day of training. But we know that that was then reduced to a 4-hour slot, and Scott Hayward has given us evidence about that. In essence, between April 2011 and April 2014, there was this 4-hour overlap between the two shifts, which meant that there could be staff released for training while maintaining service delivery, subject to what he called abstractions. I've summarised his evidence both in his statement and orally to us, but is that right? Do you agree with that?
Yes, I do.
Yeah. We also know that in 2012, refresher training that was delivered during the 4-hour training slot was in that slot, and only 61% of control staff had FSG training that year. That's what Scott Hayward has said to us in his table in his first witness statement, which we can look at if you need to. Now, that means, doesn't it, that the change to the duration of the refresher training happened while you were still at control before your secondment to the CFOA in September 2012, yes?
Yes.
Yes. Can we look at your statement then, please, at page 20, where you say this, but paragraph 52.1, releasing officers from the shift patterns for training is an issue for brigade control rooms across the country. I understand that the reduction of the full-day training to a 4-hour slot was motivated by the difficulty of releasing officers from the shift pattern for a full day, but I was not involved in this discussion or decision as I was at CFOA at the time. The difficulty there, was that not one that was anticipated in 2010 and 2011 when the training was being designed and presented to the Lackland House Board?
Not that I can recall.
Why is that?
Because I think the movement to the new shift pattern with the overlap with the 4-hour training slot, we thought was thought sufficient, but I can't recall there being any problems raising that. As I understood it, we were delivering a full day's training, and we always would.
What happened that wasn't anticipated that meant that the full day had to be reduced to 4 hours?
I don't know.
Was the hope that there would be full attendance if the training was moved to a 4-hour slot?
I can't speak for this training, but no, I wouldn't have thought so. It would be very rare to be able to get a full attendance because we had a number of factors, as Scott said already, abstraction, and training would always run catch-up sessions for individuals.
Let's then turn to your review of the refresher training that you did in August 2011, so jumping forward a year to the latter part of 2011. Can we go to your witness statement, please, at paragraph 49, which you have on page 19 there, and it says this: I was not directly involved in the development and implementation of the refresher FSG training until I returned from the CFOA in January 2015. As an SOM and therefore a member of the leadership team, I may have provided comments in that capacity. Now, can I ask you please to be shown LFB 3028443? You'll need, I think, both emails. The main one I want to focus on is the second of the pair on the screen on page 1 there. Your first email of the 29th of August 2011, forward fire survival training. And I just should show you the first email before we look at the main text. Can we scroll to the top? And there you correct what you say a few days later and say, I was looking at the FSG recommendations and have noticed that I forwarded you the wrong document. So here is the original one and not the RIF. So you'd obviously forwarded him something different from what you were commenting on in the first of those two emails. Can we go back to the email then and look at the email at the foot of page 1 and over onto page 2? You say this, 29th of August 2011 to Scott Hayward. Hi Scott, I finally got round to reviewing the FSG training. It may be a good exercise for us all to do, as my review is pretty scathing. I also feel slightly embarrassed because last week Avon FRS rang and asked to view it, which I approved as I assumed it was sound in its content. Despite the spelling and grammar issues, the advice is not clear. I have attached comments on each PowerPoint. Shall we generally discuss them at our weekly meeting? If Ron or Reet saw what we had put out as training, I think they would go nuts. Regards, Joanne. And that's on the next page. Why were you reviewing the FSG training?
Probably because Scott Hayward had asked me to do it.
When you say, I finally got round to reviewing, quotes unquotes, the FSG training, first of all, why do you say finally? Had there been a long gap between your initially being asked to do so and doing it?
I wouldn't imagine that long. If I was asked to do something, I probably would have completed it in a timely fashion.
Right. And why do you say reviewing in quotation marks there?
I can't recall.
This was for refresher FSG training, wasn't it?
Yes.
Yes. Do you know why you were only doing so at this point, given your involvement much earlier, such as the 2nd of July 2010 rollout?
I don't.
By the time you came to review the FSG refresher, had the CROs already accessed it as part of their training in that year? And by it I mean the CBT package, this being 2011.
I don't believe the CBT package was ready in 2011. I can't be sure, but I don't believe it was. I think we were working on it and I'd been asked to comment as I did on these. So it might have been part of that. But I think we'd given some feedback when we'd attended the 2010, and I was obviously asked by Scott to look at it again, and I don't know why he asked me, and found that there were some additions that needed to be made.
Yes, and we've seen something of that with Scott Hayward about what it was that was delivered in 2010. Let me ask the question slightly differently. At this stage, when you came to review the FSG refresher training, had the CROs already accessed what they were supposed to access by way of training, given that this was a year in which there would be no trainer-led training?
I'm not sure. Looking at the date, I always believed that we would undertake FSG training in the last few months of the year, so from September onwards. So if this is August, maybe not. But I'm not sure.
You're not sure. Before we look at your comments, are you able to tell us what happened to the comments that you made in the document you attached?
I would have sent them back to Scott as he'd asked.
Do you know whether the training was updated in response to the comments?
I should hope so.
Yes, I know. But do you remember whether it was?
No.
Right. Do you remember whether you checked to see if the training was updated in response to your comments?
No, I would have left that to Scott to talk to Lindsay about that.
Let's look at your comments, which are attached to this email. We find those at LFB 3083547. Comments on FSG. And you start with presentation 3, call handling techniques. Little value, question mark. The information provided could be considered dated with improved techniques, Tony Dane available. It distracts from the training on the fire survival techniques. If we are going to cover call handling in this training, we need to focus on proactive and reactive techniques, with the verification being to take control of a call using a fully proactive technique. Now, let's be clear and see what you looked at. Can we go, please, to LFB 000086219? This is call handling techniques, operational support team training, and that's the first page of it. If we scroll through it gently to page 2, the question I'm asking you, is this the training you reviewed? Here we have aim to examine the challenges encountered by control staff when dealing with emergency calls. Page 3, objectives. Page 4, and there's the coloured brain again, and the 4 things we looked at yesterday. This was in fact the presentation we looked at yesterday, or at least very similar to it. I say very similar. It's the same. I'm not sure what date it was generated, but it's the same presentation we looked at yesterday.
Yes.
Right. But is this the one you reviewed?
I'm not sure.
You're not sure?
No.
Let's continue through it. Page 6. Non-assertive, assertive, aggressive communication styles. Page 7. Your answers. Page 8, transactional analysis. Eric Byrne. Now, Eric Byrne, who's he?
I think he's a psychologist that created the parent-child-adult interactions that LFB Control had always used as how to handle calls.
Right. Do you think, looking at this document, that this is what you were looking at, or not?
Honestly, I can't be sure unless I attached the email. Like before, there may have been a draft presentation that Scott had forwarded to me to ask me to look at, rather than an extant one.
Right. We saw Eric Byrne a moment ago, and you explained who he was on page 4. Is that related to your reference to Tony Dane? In other words, Tony Dane being a more up-to-date theorist than Eric Byrne, who I think was developing a theory on transactional analysis in the late 1950s.
I think so, yes.
So that would tend to indicate, wouldn't it, that this was what you reviewed? Do you accept?
No, I don't believe so. I think they've, as I said, LFB have always used that transactional analysis, parent, child and adult, in their documentation, so it could have been an earlier one.
Right. I should just tell you the file name for this is SH221 Call Handling Techniques Refresher Presentation 2011. Given that this is August 2011, again, does that not help us identify this as the document we reviewed?
No, I have seen a number of training packages. It could well be, but I can't confirm that. Right.
Then let's go to LFB 000. Well, let's go back to your comments, actually, first of all, please. LFB 000855347. Presentation 2, Building Concepts. LFB 000835547. It's the document we were looking at just before, which was your comments. Yes, presentation 2, building types. Who wrote the notes to accompany the PowerPoint? And then you make some comments on the slides. You see that?
Yes.
And you make a point about slide 10, defend in place. And advice doesn't emphasize government guidelines and actions, no visuals, no mention that high-rise flats normally have alternative escape routes, balconies leading to fire exits, etc. Slide 15, in summary, if there is a fire in occupants-owned dwelling is to leave, this needs grammatically changing so it reads right, but we are beginning to use different terminology again. Can we simplify with advise caller, get out and stay out? There is no current fire safety advice in here, and the high-rise flats advice is wrong and contradicts the advice given on previous slides. This needs replacing with current government fire safety advice for high-rise dwellings. Can we look to streamline this and add current fire safety advice and maybe a section on how firefighters tackle high-rise fires so staff are aware of the time and the process they're following? I know we all know, but some staff do not, hence telling callers they will be with you shortly, etc. See all that?
Yes.
Did you think it was important to include details about what had happened at the Lakenhall house fire in the training?
Yes, I think so.
I don't think we see it, though. Do you know if your suggestions were ever taken up by way of a change?
I don't know, no.
We've never seen an updated version of this training presentation in any of our documents. We've got a date of modification in October 2014 at LFB 3087979, where the content appears to be identical. You weren't, of course, at the LFB at that time, so I don't need to take you to it. But do you know whether your comments there about presentation 2 building types were ever taken up and affected by way of a revision?
I don't know.
You don't. Let's look at presentation 4 then, FSG. I have numerous suggestions on this. I feel if we were to take this PowerPoint to the Lacknell board, we would be severely criticised. It fails to cover some issues we have already informed the board have dealt with. It is neither positive, grammatically correct, and does not emphasise the alternative escape routes. It does not follow Policy 539 in wording relating to our definition of an FSG call or current Home Office guidance in relation to remaining in your flat. Why did you think that you would be severely criticised?
I think I then go on to list them in slide 1 and slide 2. Those are all that was just a general statement about the presentation, and then I go on and list the ones that I believe are contrary to what we discovered in the gap analysis.
Let's look at the slide. LFB 3086214, and let's have it up at the same time as your criticisms, please. So keep the criticisms on the left-hand side and have the FSG slideshow on the right. As you can see, it's called Fire Survival Guidance. Just looking at the first page, taking a moment to digest what it says, Ms. Smith, do you think this was the presentation that you looked at for the purposes of your critique?
Yes.
Yes. And if we look at page 1, it says, why are we doing this training? Incidents have occurred where control staff have been faced with a caller who is trapped by fire and are in a distressed condition. A fatal fire in the West Midlands highlighted that the control officer was unable to give the correct advice as they had not been given the training for such situations. The Home Office decided that we should all get this training. Follow-up refresher training will be completed on an annual basis. Now, if we look at your comment on slide 1, it says, basically, this says we are doing this because Home Office says so. Positively reword on our experiences. Now, this was the same presentation, I think, as the one that had been developed in 2010, wasn't it?
I can't confirm that. If I'd seen this in 2010, I'm sure I would have provided the same comments to everyone that I have here.
So whatever review you did in July 2010, are you telling us that the comments, if this was the same slideshow at that stage, you would have made the comments at that stage?
Yes.
Yes. Looking at slide 1, the reference to a fatal fire in the West Midlands dates back to 1993, doesn't it?
It does.
Were you surprised that the training document doesn't mention the Lacknell House incident at all?
Yes, that's why I say let's positively reword on our experiences. That's what I mean.
Oh, I see. But even you don't mention Lacknell there?
No, it's just a note on my comments to discuss with the POM, so I just would have thought that we needed to cover our experiences and what had happened at Lacknell.
Right. Are you able to explain how it came about that your training department, notwithstanding your gap analysis, had for some 18 months or so been putting out training, refresher training material to your CROs, which were as bad as this?
No, again, it wasn't my department. Training wasn't my department, but I can't explain that. All I can say is that had I been shown that presentation, I would have made the same comments that I had made here when reviewing it.
Now, just pausing there, because I'll come back to both of those documents in due course, if I may. Can we look at LFB 000086226? And I'm so sorry, can I keep the slideshow on the screen, remove the criticism, and put LFB 000086226 up? I want to compare the two documents. Yes. And what we've got on the left-hand screen now is the FSG training slide presentation on fire survival guidance that was created in 2012. And if we look at the two, I can't see any difference between them. Can you?
No.
No. it appears that it wasn't updated in response to your criticism, was it?
It doesn't appear so, no.
Can you explain why?
No.
When you made your criticisms, did you follow them up? Did you follow up to make sure that your points were taken on board and embedded into the presentations?
No, I had given them to Scott. I recall on the email it says let's discuss them. So I'm sure we would have all discussed them.
Right. I mean, given your role at the time, and maybe that's the answer to this, but you tell me, given your role at the time, did you not regard it as your responsibility to make sure that the control room officers were getting the training you thought they should be getting?
No, my role at the time wasn't one of training, and I had given the information as asked to comment on it by Scott Hayward.
After all, we know that you didn't leave until September of 2012. Do I take it from that even though you didn't regard it as your role, you nonetheless had the opportunity to chase it up and ask Scott Hayward what had happened to your criticisms?
I don't think I didn't regard it as my role. It wasn't my role.
Right. Now let's go back then to page 2 of your comments on presentation 4, LFB 00083547, and let's remove the left-hand document but keep the right-hand document on the screen, and go to page 11 in the right-hand document, LFB 00086214, and page 2, as we have it on the screen, of your comments, which is on presentation 4. And you're looking at page 11, where you say, slide 11 states that due to the stressful situation that the caller is in, they may not be able to think about an escape route. I don't know where the evidence of this comes from and why staff are being informed of this. If it is to provide them with a reason to ask callers for alternative escape routes, then I can provide several examples of where we've not explored alternative escape routes with them with severe consequences. And the training slide says, escape, why can't the caller escape to safety? What is preventing this? Fire, incapacitation, smoke, obstruction, locked doors. Try to identify why the caller cannot get out. Due to the stressful situation that the caller is in, they may not be able to think about an escape route. And we've seen your comment about that. What in a nutshell was your concern there?
I can't recall. Maybe it was just that we weren't saying the message and being clear about get out and stay out initially, or maybe that we just wanted to focus on exploring escaping with the caller in the initial phase. I can't recall any more than that.
It looks on the face of it that you were concerned that CROs would not have enough guidance given to them in the training about how sufficiently to explore alternative escape routes. Is that a fair reading, at least of the documents? Possibly,
along with my comments, yes.
Along with your, yes. So do we take it from that you were well aware of the need for a control room operator to explore alternative escape routes with the caller?
Yes.
Yes. And if we look at the 2012 version of this, again, LFB 00086226 at page 10, put that up on the left-hand side of the screen in place of the critique, if we can do that. We again see that they are identical. You can see that. Again, do you know why the document wasn't updated in 2012, but was recreated in 2012, notwithstanding your critique of this slide?
No, I don't.
You can't. Can we then go back to your comments on page 2, LFB 00083547, page 2, and keep the right-hand document on the screen, please. On the right-hand document, go to page 14. This is slide 14. Slide 14 says, reassure the caller, inform the caller you are going to give them some advice that will help them to keep them as safe as possible until the FFs arrive. Explain firstly that you need to ask some questions. Reassuring the caller will be beneficial as people breathe more slowly when calm, making them less susceptible to the effects of smoke. Calm them down, swap names. If you look at the left-hand side of the screen, your comment, keep them safe as possible until FF arrive, ? We know this is a long time in high-rise buildings and therefore can update them on the fact that FF are at the building and they have the caller's information, but suggest remove until FF arrive. If we look at the FSG training created in 2012, so remove, please, the document on the left-hand side of the screen, and let's have LFB 000086226 again, this time page 13. You can see that the slides are identical again, and the words "until the FFs arrive" remain in the slide. Again, do you know why the 2012 version was not updated?
No.
In keeping with both of those slides, the 2011 version and the 2012 version, we can see that there's no warning, as appears in the 1993 National Guidance, that providing reassurance may provide a false sense of security and may even be dangerous in some circumstances. Is that something you noticed at the time when you did your critique?
If I hadn't listed it, then maybe not.
No.
I can't be sure.
No, you didn't list it. My question is, why not? Why didn't you ask for that specifically to be incorporated into the training, given, as we've seen from 1093, paragraph 2, last sentence, that is exactly what CRO should be told?
I just think I was asked to review the training document. And again, I probably didn't envisage that the comments wouldn't be adopted and that they would be worked on. I thought annual FSG training was to be reviewed and a package created every year when they were delivering face-to-face training.
Yes. Even though you were asked, even though you didn't envisage that the comments wouldn't be adopted, why not? Presumably you were working on the basis that they would be adopted. Otherwise, you wouldn't have done the work.
Well, no, I was asked by Scott Hayward to comment on the training document, which is what I did. I didn't specifically then comment on them for it to follow through with the review. They were handed back to Scott and no doubt the OST team, and they would have been developing the training package, so they might have included it too. I don't think it was solely down to me to comment and make sure the content was correct.
Do you remember why you did not put in a comment to the effect that the warning contained in the last sentence of paragraph 2 of 1093, which you were familiar with, was not spelt out in the training package at this point?
No, I don't recall.
Now, in none of these slides, either those that you reviewed in, so far as we can see, in 2010 or 2011, or the 2012 versions, is there any reference to FSC 54 or the need to assess the caller, specifically the caller's age, gender, ethnicity, or mental or physical ability? Is that something you picked up on at the time when you did your review in August 2011?
No, I don't believe so. I think we've discussed 5404 and it's non-adoption into LFB, so no.
Right.
When we worked on the gap analysis and the Lacanal team that were reviewing the document, I believe at the time were content that everything we needed was contained in 1093, including those in 5404. It's mentioned in the body of the document in 1093. So it was purely against 1093 we reviewed it.
I see. So the absence in any of these slides about the need to assess the caller, age, gender, ethnicity, mental or physical ability, can be traced back to that original thinking, can it?
I'm not entirely sure, but that is what the discussions were had at the time, and I wasn't asked to create the training, I was just asked to comment on the training, and I've commented on these slides.
The training in 2011, which is the odd year, was validated with a role-play exercise. Do you remember that?
No, I don't.
You don't? And that's what Scott Hayward tells us at paragraph 75, but you don't recall that, is that right?
I don't recall, no.
You don't. As part of your review in August 2011, did you review the role-play exercise?
No.
Do you know why not?
Because I presume that when Scott asked me to review the training package, he would have sent me those training packages and I would have just reviewed them. I don't believe they involved role play.
Right. I'd like to look at an email run slightly earlier in 2011 with you, May of that year. Can we look, please, at LFB 304 9577? And I'd like to look at the email at the foot of page 1 from Chris Sharp to Lindsay Turner, copy to Scott Hayward and you, as well as Nikki O'Shea, subject Fire Survival Refresher Course. Lindsay, we are continuing preparing the course. And then if you go over the page, she says, one element is observation of 2 video clips of mock fire survival calls for control staff to assess. The quality of the call taking will range from excellent to okay. We will film each video in the BCA and make it available for staff to use when convenient. Now, just pausing there, what was your understanding of what was being suggested when you received this email?
I think this in 2011, sorry.
Yes, it's in May 2011.
Yes, so this is because the CBT packages weren't ready. So I think they were looking at using a PowerPoint presentation and obviously some mock fire survival guidance calls to provide refresher training to staff.
I see. Was this proposal, I suppose, intended to change the active role play exercise to one where video clips were watched?
It certainly looks like it, but if it was in 2011, I think because we thought it was a CBT, that active role play wouldn't be included.
Yes, I see. And then you reply to Scott Hayward and Lindsay Turner on the 27th of May. If we roll up to page 1, so 2 days later, and you say, hi, Scott and Lindsay. From a Lacanal investigation point of view, and legal, I'm sure, can we justify why we are not using the FSG programme contained in 1093 for a basis of refresher training? We are certain that both HSE and coroners will ask to see the measures we've put in place since Lacanal. One area we are defending is as to why we deviated from 1093 in the first place. We've confirmed that we have altered this and have changed documentation to align with 1093, yet we are not following the recommended training package, hence my question. I'm sure Chris and Nikki have worked hard to create this package, and I'm really not being critical. Just know these questions will be asked of us. If we can substantiate why we have decided on 2 videos, etc., and we can document why and the further benefits it provides our staff, and we as managers, and Dave Brown, I suppose, are happy, then I am supportive of this. So does that tell us that you were aware, as of May 2011, that the role play exercise was going to be changed from an active role play to a passive one?
Yes, I think I've responded to the email from Chris Sharp with my thoughts on it.
Yes. And that proposal would be inconsistent with national guidance?
I think that's what I say, yes.
It is. And as such, inconsistent with what you told the Lacanal board?
Yes.
And inconsistent with what the coroner would be told?
Yes.
Did you get a response to your points? Or I call them queries. They're not really queries. Your observations.
I don't recall.
Did you do anything at the time yourself, given your involvement, as we see from this email, to try at least to ensure that the active role play was reinstated, at least for the trainer-led years? No,
I'd sent it to Scott Hayward and Lindsay Turner, who were both delivering the refresher training, or Lindsay was delivering the refresher training as in charge of OST.
Now, Scott Hayward tells us in his second witness statement of paragraph 74 that there was feedback at this time that staff felt uncomfortable carrying out the role play element of the training. That's what he recalls. Do you recall that?
I recall there being some discussion about staff being uncomfortable with role play, yes. Did
you take any steps to remedy that problem rather than just allowing the role play to be made more passive?
No, like I say, I didn't really, I wasn't really included in the training or what was being undertaken in terms of role play.
Mr. Chairman, I've come to another topic, or subtopic, but I'd like to start it, if I may. It's a little early for the break.
Yes, that's all right. Well, find a convenient point
In it.
when you get to it. Then.
Very good, thank you. I want to ask you about September 2011 high-rise reviews and the need for high-rise and FSG training as a new subtopic. Now, we've already covered your involvement with Patrick Utting in Policy 790, known at that time as Draft 155. Now, we may come back to that once again, but I just want to ask you about a report you drafted on the 4th of September 2011, shortly after your review of the FSG training at the end of August. NFB 3084292. Now, this is an email from you to Scott Hayward on the 4th of September 2011, in fact, the same day as the corrective email we've just seen about your critique of the slides being rolled out by way of refresher training to CROs. And you say, "Hi, Scott and Lindsay. Last week we started to discuss FSG and the current training. I had a further meeting with Pat Utting on Wednesday, and the policy appears to be close to completion, which means we have a number of actions and changes to make before the policy goes live, not including the MUR changes. Attached is a brief and the draft policy. As I'm not in attendance for the weekly meeting, I think we need to come up with a plan." Now, you say attached is a brief and the draft policy. Can we look at the brief you attached? LFB 000084293. It's a document entitled Fire Survival Guidance Report, and the first paragraph says, "Draft Policy 155 Fire Survival Guidance is close to being implemented. This will require some major changes in FSG procedure for Brigade control." First, can you confirm that that was the document you attached, or one of the documents you attached to your email we've just looked at?
I can't recall writing this, but if I attached it to the email, then I would imagine that would have been from me, yes.
And do you recall what the purpose of this document was?
No, just as the email says, it looks like I am letting Scott and Lindsay know that Policy 155 is near to completion and that it will influence FSG training for control.
Did anybody ask you to write this?
Not that I recall.
Given your role, do you know why you volunteered it?
Because I knew the detail and the content of the draft policy 155 that was going to be the FSG core training, and probably just to update Scott and Lindsay, as I wasn't in attendance at a meeting, so couldn't verbalise it, my comments on what needed to change.
And if we look at the second paragraph, I've read the first to you, it says this, and I'll just take you through a little bit of this document. "These changes will need to be rolled out with training support, tailored for both control officers and supervisors. The current FSG refresher training has covered," and they have 4 bullet points, "building types, call handling techniques, 4 principles of FSG, some supervisor training." And you have comments in the paragraphs after each, in the parentheses after each. "Building types, although no details on escape routes or national fire safety advice. Call handling techniques does not cover reactive and proactive as stated in 1093. 4 principles of FSG does not include reassess."
It does include reassess.
Sorry, it does include reassess. Quite right. Some supervisor training. However, Draft Policy 155 will call for a more robust approach. Policy 155 uses the Agree Policy 539 ECM definition of an FSG call and informs crews that control will declare a fire survival guidance call in progress. Whilst this is not a change from the norm, as it is often accompanied by details of the FSG caller's address, we do pass information regarding individuals stuck in properties with smoke in the corridor. To assist with this, we need to get across what is an FSG call and what isn't. We've tried providing staff with an understanding of 1093, but we know from our high-rise reviews that staff are not seeking alternative escape with callers. Staff are asking callers, can they get out, leading to confusion when the caller says no or not sure. Staff are still not assessing, quotes unquote, the situation before providing FSG advice. Staff are not using the agreed statement for callers with no smoke, heat or fire in their high-rise properties. You are, quotes, you are usually safe to remain in your flat, but if the situation changes or you feel unsafe, call us back, close quotes. This is not in the current training, question mark. Staff are still telling callers that the firefighters are coming to get them, or the firefighters will come and check on you. For this policy to work, we will need to address all these points. Now, you've told us that this was generated because of your role with Pat Utting in developing Policy 790. Yes?
Yes.
And specifically your role from the control perspective in relation to that policy.
Yes.
Yes. What were the high-rise reviews that you mentioned in your brief?
I think those are the ones that I carried out since the Lacknow incident.
I see. So not the call coach reviews?
No.
No. Did these problems occur across the board with CROs? These 5 bullet-pointed problems?
I'm not sure. I provided the inquiry an example of some of the themes I'd noticed, but I didn't recall all of these.
Right. Were you still, or were you concerned that there were still deficiencies in the way CROs handled FSG calls, even though by this time you are some 18 months after your gap analysis?
Yes, I must have been to document them, and I think I say later that we need to make staff confident as to what an FSG call is and how they handle it.
Had you addressed these concerns in any way at that time, for example, by approaching staff members and giving them feedback?
I may have done separately through, as I mentioned to the inquiry earlier, about talking to the operations manager when I listen to calls.
Now, this email, this document was sent by you to Scott Hayward and Lindsay Turner on the 4th of September. Do you remember whether you took it further and took these concerns, for example, to AC Dave Brown?
I don't. I think because I wasn't there at the meeting that we were clearly having, that I've provided these comments, and that might have been generated off the back of knowing what was in Policy 155 and previously reviewing the training material.
Did you do anything to seek to bring to each CRO's attention these 5, or perhaps 6 points or problems?
So in terms of addressing them, yes, I thought that's what I'd done by the comments in there, in terms that should influence training, and we should make sure that control staff are confident. And again, my feedback with individual OMs to control officers about how they were progressing.
Yes. Do you remember speaking to individual CROs in the control room about any of these particular issues, rather than taking it to Lindsay Turner and Scott Hayward, actually going to the control room officers and telling them what you say here?
Not specifically, but I may have in conversations when we'd spoken about them, or alternatively when they had achieved all those points and we had reviewed an FSG call that was very positive with a successful outcome. I might have also shared it at Brigade Control Management meeting as well to the operations managers.
And what response were you given when you raised these matters at Brigade Control Management meetings, as you think you might have done?
I think there would have been discussion about how, as a control room, that could be achieved.
Right. Now, I'm going to come back to this report after the break, but I think this is now a convenient moment for the break.
Is it? Right. Thank you very much. All right. Well, now we'll have our morning break at that point then, Ms. Smith. We'll come back, please, at 20 to 12. And as before, please don't speak to anyone about your evidence or anything relating to it while you're out of the room. All right?
Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Millett. 20 to 12, please. Would you ask Mr. Smith to come back in, please? All right, Mr. Smith, are you ready to carry on then? Thank you. Yes, Mr. Millett.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Can we go back, please, to the report we were on at the break, which is LFB 3084293. If you look at page 2 in the third paragraph there, you say, it is the high-rise incidents that appear to cause difficulty and misunderstanding. To ensure these points are met, I recommend, and then there's a long list of bullet points. Training is on high-rise incidents only. We can mention domestic premises and the PR attendants, but focus is on high-rise flats. Training discusses the difference between an FSG call and not, and we assess on this. Training provides confidence for staff to ask callers to seek alternative escape route, cover building design, and that high-rise flats usually have more than one escape route, and that corridors lead to protected stairwells. How operationally they deal with a high-rise fire, and how that means that crews are not able to check on residents and will not undertake this role as a priority, so control should not rely on this or inform the caller that this will happen. Training covers the role of the radio operator and the language they use. Staff are also shown the FSG pads available for firefighters to complete en route and the information they are after. Supervisors understand the priority to dedicate a SUP, that's a supervisor, to a command unit to pass up-to-date information on multi-FSG, additional support mechanisms such as access to CSS, etc. provided to them, future developments, FSG notepad for control, similar to operational crews. And then you say at the bottom, we also need to decide who is developing the training strategy and who will deliver the training. We've talked about discussing FSG with OST and the OMs to get across what we are trying to achieve. We could provide them with the issues from Lacanal, but I'm not sure if the board would approve, and our report is still not cleared and cannot be distributed. I can get some recordings to provide some evidence of what we are still doing wrong and have an open discussion. As this has taken such a long time to bring in, and we've had involvement in this from the start, I know if it starts to go wrong, we will be asked why ever time, and have to report this to the board. This may ask questions about our training and that we are not following our own policies. Now, there's a lot in that material there, but first, why did you come to the conclusion that it was high-rise incidents that caused difficulty and misunderstanding in particular?
I can't recall.
Why was further training needed when FSG training had already been carried out?
I think I've just listed my observations there.
Right. So at this stage, in addition to your critique we saw of the 29th of August, a week later or so, here is a pretty blistering attack on FSG call handling and what is being omitted from the training.
On the training, yes.
Yes. Did you discuss your recommendations contained in this document with Scott Hayward and Lindsay Turner, having sent them this document?
I would imagine I would have, or they would have come back to me if they'd had any questions, but I don't recall specifically.
Now, what was the outcome? Do you know?
No, I don't. I don't know whether they made their own decisions about not following my recommendations and guidance or not. I don't know.
Were any steps taken, so far as you are aware, to implement any of the recommendations by way of changing the training programme in any respect?
No. As I said, I've just commented on it and made some recommendations from my experience to Scott and Lindsay.
Are you able to explain why, so far as you know, none of these observations, points of criticism, were reflected in any amended training after this?
No.
Okay. Did you decide, I say you, did you and Scott Hayward and Lindsay Turner decide who was to develop the training strategy and who was to deliver the training itself?
I would imagine we did, because the training continued with OST delivering it and Lindsay Turner in charge of training. Had Scott asked me to take over training.
Are you able to explain why in September 2011 there were still these question marks about what I think you would accept are fairly rudimentary aspects of delivering training to control room operators?
No. As I said, my expectation would have been that they would have been included in the training.
Yes. And are you able to explain why, as at that date, some 2.25 years on from the Lacknell incident, these question marks about control room FSG call handling still remained?
No.
In the last paragraph that I've read to you, you see what is said there. We've talked about, if we just go back a page, we can see it. In the penultimate paragraph, I'm sorry, you say, we've talked about discussing FSG with OST, etc. Why did you want to provide OST and OMs the issues from Lacknell?
Well, because I think that gave them a sound reasoning of why the training needed to be adjusted with all the points I've listed above.
Do you know why that hadn't been done already as part of the 2010 training or the 2011 training?
No, I don't, but I do get the feeling when I refer to the board in those emails that actually I think they didn't feel that it would be beneficial to share it with control staff. I say they, the Lacknell team that we were working with until the report was cleared.
You refer to OST and the OMs. Why not the CROs?
I think OST and the OMs that we met with on a regular basis to share and discuss information and the issues from Lacknell with them, and they could distribute that down to the watches.
Is your reference in this paragraph to the board, the Lacknell House board?
I believe so, yes.
Why were you not sure if the Lacknell House board would approve of you educating the OST and OMs, let alone CROs, on the lessons from Lacknell?
Like I say, it's just because the report wasn't cleared. So I was just raising if it could be distributed or not. I think this refers to the report that I contributed to, but the actual Lacknell report that was published was amended, so maybe they didn't want it distributed.
Why would that be?
I'm not sure.
And it reads on the face of it that you're offering to provide the board, provide OST and the OMs with the issues from Lacknell, but I'm not sure if the board would approve. What would the board disapprove of by way of provision to the OST and the OMs of the issues from Lacknell?
I can't recall. I just recall some vague recollections that the Lacknell report, until it was completed, we went to share it, but
right.
That is just a vague recollection.
Were your concerns, as reflected in this document, this brief, ever taken to the Lacknell House Board?
I don't believe so. Sorry, I'm not sure of the date that I wrote this report.
This was the 4th of September 2011. This is at least it's under
I don't believe so.
That email of that date. You don't believe so? Why not? Do you know why not?
No, as far as I was concerned, I'd made some recommendations following a review of the training with policy 155 going live, and that had gone to the appropriate line management.
I don't think we've ever seen any Lacknell House board minutes which reflect, even in general terms, the concerns that you've expressed in this document. Are you able to, from your own perspective, to explain why that is?
No.
And I then turn to other changes to the training, specifically FSO input and its loss. Now, we saw earlier and we can go back to it if you like, that assurances were provided to the Lakenal House Board in 2010, and we've seen the July, September and November minutes, that FSG training was going to be created and delivered in part by fire safety officers, at least during the live years, yes?
Yes.
Yes. Let's look at the decision that was made whereby fire safety officers were not involved in delivering FSG refresher training annually after 2010. That's where I want to go with this. Can we go to your witness statement, please, at page 20? And on page 20, you can see paragraph 52.2 at the foot of the screen, and it says, I was not involved in this decision regarding the involvement of securing fire safety officers to attend the training, as I was in the technical team of OST. So, first, is it right that the decision to drop the involvement of fire safety officers attending the training in the teacher-led years happened before you were seconded to the CFOA?
I believe so. I recall that we were struggling to get fire safety officers to attend, but that's just in a general conversation we would have had together, all three of us in the management team.
All three of you being you, Scott Hayward and Lindsay Turner?
Yes.
Let's go to LFB 000-58256. If you go to page 1, at the bottom of page 1, you can see an email header from Chris Sharp to you, 22nd of February 2012. And if we turn to page 2, we can see the email itself. Hi, Joanne and everyone. You can see also that it's copied to Scott Hayward and Lindsay Turner, as well as MER OST. Hi, Joanne and everyone. All the material we used in the Day 1 course has been translated into the computer-based training packages for easy access to control staff. Is it proposed that we use this same material for a one-day course? If so, this would be counterproductive, in my opinion, by rehashing the same material for both the one-day course and the year in between. To ensure that we give quality and meaningful training, we would need to keep the training fresh. We have also lost the fire safety input as their department is being subsumed from the end of March. Can you guide me as to when you would like the one day's training to take place and what subject matter you would require us to cover? And you can see, if you go back up to page 1, please, you email Lindsay Turner and Scott Hayward in two different, well, you email them as separate recipients. In other words, they are, the email is to both of them, 25th of February 2012. Hi, Scott and Lindsay. Before we have even started our annual refresher training, we are already being told we've lost fire safety input into a course which 1093 specifies should be in the course. Part of the issues arising from Lakenal is that we had no fire safety input and therefore did not provide staff with correct and relevant advice. My key issue to Chris was that we have no need to publish the CBT immediately, as we can roll this out as part of the training this year. However, it needs to go with fire safety input, not CBT, and role play. Are we all in agreement that our full one-day refresher on FSG is not CBT and is interactive? And if so, can this be explained to Chris and OST as the way we need to proceed? Now, two things. First, you can see this is February 2012. That was an evening year, and at that stage, the refresher training for that year was going to be trainer-led, including FSG. Yes?
Yes.
Yes. And secondly, just to clarify, when you were told by Chris Sharp that you had lost the fire safety input in the email I've just shown you of the 22nd of February, what did you understand her to mean by that?
That fire safety wouldn't be delivering their elements of the training packages.
And you regarded that as, am I right looking at this email, a very important element in the teacher-led training?
I was conscious that we had committed to the Lakenal board that we would ensure that fire safety had input into FSG training.
And then if we go to the top of the screen, we can see the email from Scott Hayward to you and Lindsay Turner by way of his own response. And he says this: it is essential that there is a distinction between the one-day full course and the interim refresher as agreed on day 1. I do not believe we have lost fire safety. We just need to follow through on what changes they are making in their department and ensure that our training is included in the transition. Lindsay, can you communicate this to Chris, please, and ensure that the one-day course is interactive, with FS input and role play. First, did you agree with Scott Hayward?
Yes.
Did you agree with the sentiments that and his request in there?
Yes.
Yes. Did you have a discussion with him about this topic or problem at this point?
No. I just made my comments clear on response to Chris's email and wanted to reiterate that it was important fire safety delivered the training presentations.
Were any further efforts, as suggested by Scott Hayward's email, to get fire safety to provide input into the FSG training made?
I believe so, just in terms of conversations that Scott and Lindsay would have taken that up with fire safety.
Were you aware that Assistant Commissioner Steve Chirek and Assistant Commissioner Dave Brown had decided that fire safety officers would not deliver FSG refresher training?
No.
You weren't?
No.
At the time, did you consider yourself making any representations to them or anybody else about reintroducing their input into refresher training?
No, I didn't know that they'd made that decision. Presumably that's why Lindsay and Scott had so much difficulty getting fire safety to attend.
Now, you left in September 2012. Do you know whether the one-day teacher-led refresher training for CROs had been carried out by that stage for 2012?
I don't believe so, just in terms of we had been planning all of 2012 for the Olympics, so I would imagine that would have been scheduled post the Olympics, and that corresponds with us delivering FSG training in the latter part of the year from September onwards.
Yes. I then want to turn to what the training looked like when you came back from the CFOA in January 2015, when I think you were in charge, as you told us on the first day of your evidence, you were in charge of training.
Yes.
Yes. And I want to start in that period with what you found out about the assurances. Can we start with paragraph 56 of your witness statement on page 22? And you say, in the third line, upon my return from CFOA in 2015, I asked for a list of which control members had FSG training outstanding. I also requested access to Babcock CBT packages in order to update them, as they referred to the older mobilising system ProCAD and not Vision, as they would have been out of date when Vision was rolled out. Who did you ask for that list? Do you remember?
It would have been OST.
Do you remember who in OST?
I probably would have emailed the general inbox that they had, so they all would have received a copy and someone would have responded to me.
What prompted you to ask for that list?
I can't recall.
Given that control was outside the scope of LFB, the LFB Babcock contract, what were you hoping to gain by seeing the CBTs?
The CBT packages needed reviewing with a change of mobilising system because they can change some technical detail in them, and that we were probably looking to roll out training on those CBT packages. It was an odd year, so that's probably when I started to look at that.
And what were you told in response to your request for the list?
I probably would have been given a number of staff that had FSG training outstanding.
Do you know who gave you that list?
No, I don't.
Did you ask at that time for an update on FSG training and its content, either from Scott Hayward or your predecessor, temporary predecessor in the post, Vic Bagnall?
No, I think that's probably what generated me to ask for a list of those outstanding members.
You asked for a list of which control members had FSG training outstanding,
yes,
and a copy of the CBT packages in order to update them. Did you ask for an update on FSG training more generally, either from Scott Hayward or Vic Bagnall?
Not that I can recall.
Right. I just want to understand what you mean when you say you asked for a copy of Babcock's CBT packages in order to update them. Were you asking, what were you asking for?
We were asking for the CBT packages so we could make some amendments to them.
What state had the CBT packages for control room operators reached at the time you left for the CFOA in September 2012?
So I can recall them being designed, and I can recall viewing some of them and adding some comment to the content of some of them.
Do you remember which you amended or added comments to?
I don't know. I can probably just the ones that had been created at that time.
Right. Was that a process you undertook after September 2011 and the provision of your comments on the refresher training packages we've seen on the 29th of August and your comments about, as part of the brief on Policy 790 on the 4th of September 2011? Was it after that you made comments on the CBT training packages?
I'm not sure. I just remember looking at them on a laptop and adding some comment to the packages that were on the laptop electronically.
Do you remember how long before you left for the CFOA you did that?
I would have said it was at the same year in 2012, but I can't be sure.
And what prompted you to do that?
I would have been, I'm assuming I would have been asked by Scott Hayward.
We looked at a number of the presentations this morning. Do you remember whether any of those presentations were presentations on which you made comments during 2012?
No, I think relating to the CBT, it was an online package that was being designed to be more interactive with yes, no and right and wrong questions and buttons. So, no, it was none of the packages I saw this morning.
Right, it wasn't the four packages or presentations on which you made comment.
No.
What prompted you to think you might need to update the CBT packages?
Because we were getting a new mobilising system that worked significantly different to the old one.
I follow. So your desire to update the CBT packages was from if I could put it this way, a mechanical point of view, to enable access to them, to make them compatible with the new vision system, as opposed to examining the substantive content?
Yes, because I think 2015 we would have looked to roll out the CBT packages for control staff, as it was an odd year, and wanted it to be updated.
In answer to the question for the list of control members with FSG training outstanding, what were you told?
I don't recall.
Were you aware that in 2012, 68% of staff undertook FSG training?
No.
Were you aware that in 2013, that number collapsed to only some 28% of staff having undertaken any kind of FSG training?
No.
Were you aware that in 2014, that number rose by only 1% to 29%?
No.
You weren't told any of that?
No.
Why did you think when you arrived back from the CFOA in 2015 there would be any control members with FSG training outstanding which would prompt your request?
Just because there would have been some control members that hadn't caught up on refresher training because they had been absent. So I would have just looked to start of that because I knew that we had committed to delivering FSG refresher training annually.
Was there not a document that you could have looked at that time, January 2015, to tell you who had undertaken refresher training, specifically FSG refresher training, in the years you were away?
There may have been that I could have looked at, kept on the OST training drive, but I just believe I asked them. to provide me a list.
Did you have a handover from Vic Bagnall when you came back in January 2015?
Yes, in terms of what he was pursuing with his current workloads and the background of Vision, the new mobilising system, and what they had prepared already.
Did you have a discussion with him or with Scott Hayward about the numbers of control room staff who had received or hadn't received FSG refresher training during the years 2013 and 14?
No.
And indeed 2012, in the last quarter of that year? No?
No.
No. Why is that?
Can I just ask you, did you receive a list of those who had FSG training outstanding, as far as you can remember?
I can't see why I wouldn't. I can't recall the list, but I would imagine they would have provided me if I'd asked for them.
Well, I asked the question because, as Mr. Millets reminded you, only just over a quarter of the staff did their training or did training in 2013 and 2014.
Yes.
Which means there ought to have been a lot of names on the list, a lot of names. Did that strike you? Did you recall that being the case?
I don't recall getting a long list of names. You're right. I don't know whether they just provided it for 2015 and that would have included some new entrance training. I can't recall. Sorry.
All right. Sorry, I interrupted a question, Mr. Millett. You might have to go back to it.
I think it was quite a similar question to the one you were asking, Mr. Chairman. Let me just go back to the question. Yes, let me try it again. You say you didn't have a discussion with Vic Bagnall or Scott Hayward about the numbers of control room staff who had either received or not received FSG refresher training during the years 2013 and 2014.
No, not that I can recall.
You don't recall that? At all events, do you remember being satisfied that the numbers of those people with, or those control room officers with FSG refresher training outstanding was reasonable and adequate and satisfactory?
I don't recall. I don't believe I would have thought that had it been a long list with 75% of staff not received training, that I wouldn't have immediately asked questions on that.
Mm. But you can't remember what figures you were given?
No.
Turning to the content of the training, what were you told? Were you told anything?
No, I don't believe I was told anything about the content of the training.
Did you become aware then, or later perhaps, that in 2012 staff members only undertook 4 hours of FSG training instead of the full day as envisaged?
Yes, I think I was aware of that.
Right, because that happened, or was proposed, yes. I think, before you left. Is that
yes,
the position?
Yes, I think I was aware of that.
Because of the change to the short shift and the overlapping 4 hours in 2011?
Yes.
Right. Were you told, or did you discover, that the role-play element of the assessment process became a passive exercise in 2012, requiring staff only to listen to FSG calls and discuss the positive and negative aspects of each, rather than interactive on a simulated live call?
No.
You weren't. Given that you'd made a particular point in 2011 of requesting active FSG role-play, and given also, as we've seen, that it was part of national guidance, were you surprised that the role-play element had been curtailed in that way?
Yes.
Did you do anything to raise the fact that the role-play had been curtailed in that way with Scott Hayward or anybody else?
Yes, I think through my emails and my comments that I've made, I did.
Did you seek to reinstate it?
Probably. It would be unlike me not to.
Right. You say there were emails about this. Well, let's see how we go with that. Were you aware that in 2013 and 2014, your years of absence, that the training appears to have been limited to CROs accessing and reviewing presentations, such as the FSG Operators RIF, and being involved in command unit training sessions?
No.
Did you ever find out if the staff had been able to access the CBT training package itself in the years 2012 to 15? Certainly 2013, which was a CBT year,
No.
Now, Scott Hayward told us in his evidence that he could not confirm himself if any of those CBT training packages were delivered to CROs. The inquiry has seen no evidence of it. Can you help?
I think because of in 2015 with the disruption that the new mobilising system created, that again in 2016 we tried very hard to roll out a CBT refresher training to all control staff.
Did there come a time after January 2015 when you came to learn that in 2013 there'd been no CBT delivered by way of training to control room staff?
There may have, when I explored trying to get the CBT packages live for all control staff in 2016.
Right.
Yes.
And did you ever find out why it was that FSG training had not been delivered, at least in those years, late 2012, 13 and 14, as had been planned and promised to the coroner after Lakanal?
No.
Did you ever ask?
No.
Why not?
Because I've already explained, I was away on a secondment and there were responsible people undertaking that role with continuity with Scott, who was in charge of control. And I would have expected that to be delivered.
And nobody did FSG training in 2015 at all?
No.
Because of the vision problems?
Well, yes, there was no mobilising system which was stable enough to undertake any training apart from the vision training.
Looking at the matter generally, when you came back from the CFOA in January 2015, and thinking back to the comments you'd made on the training some years before in the August and September of 2011, given the fact that by January 2015 you were taking on a new role and had become head of training, did you do an exercise yourself to make sure that, as at January 15, all of your concerns expressed in August and September 2011 had been properly embedded in the training being given to CROs, whether new entrant or refresher?
No, as I've said already, I would have expected when I sent my comments to both the head of control and to the training manager that those comments had been taken and discussed and either agreed or put into the training. So no, and I wouldn't describe my role as head of training. I was in charge of the OST team, who delivered training.
Indeed. And as somebody in charge of the OST team who delivered training, was it not a matter of importance to you just to satisfy yourself that the concerns that you had expressed so trenchantly in the two documents we saw in August and September 2011 had been properly reflected in the training by then being delivered to CROs?
I think the priority was to ensure that London Fire Brigade had a fit mobilising system, which when we started to look at it in very early 2015, it didn't have. So the focus and the priority was in ensuring that London Fire Brigade could mobilise fire engines. So I didn't undertake that review, no.
Was a decision made at any point by you or anybody else more senior to you that, notwithstanding your comments and trenchant criticisms as we've seen, the training wouldn't be updated?
Well, there must have been, because it wasn't updated.
Can you tell us about that decision?
No.
When it was made, who made it, why it was made?
No, I'm surprised that it wasn't, and my comments weren't taken on board and the training wasn't amended.
Now let's look a little bit more closely at the FSG training from January 2015 until 2017, when the Grenfell Tower fire occurred. If we go to paragraph 60 of your statement, you say at page 23, and this is under the question, what is meant, I'm so sorry, if we scroll down we can see the question, or rather scroll up. There it is, 12D. What is meant by the statement in the assurance review that FSG refresher training was not carried out consistently on an annual basis? Are you able to state what refresher training was carried out in which years and by how many members of control staff? You say in paragraph 59 that you can't speak to whether it was rolled out consistently on an annual basis. And then at 60 you say this. As noted elsewhere in this statement, there was still some FSG training conducted between 2015 and 17, albeit not in the manner envisaged by the Lacknell House Review, which would have been in-person training one year, followed by a CBT package the following year. FSG packages were available to control staff via CBT packages, and all new entrants received full training on FSG as part of the new entrants course. There would have also been a more informal training as part of the responsibility of the OMs to manage on-watch training and conduct familiarisation exercises with current policy. And you refer also to the Joint Command Unit exercises at paragraph 57. I don't think we need to go to those, which continued to be rolled out in 2016.
They did.
Which had an FSG element to them. Now, in general, am I right in thinking that from your evidence, you say that there were basically 3 training formats in place for existing staff members, so not new entrants? 1, a CBT package, 2, Command Unit FSG training, and 3, informal training. Yes?
Yes.
Yes. Would you agree that none of those was the full day in-person refresher training with role play delivered in part by fire safety officers that had been planned and promised after Lacknell?
Yes, I do.
Did you ever investigate what the Lacknell House Board, or after April 2013, the Lacknell House Working Group, had been told about the state of play on FSG training?
No, I wasn't even told there was a Lacknell House Working Group.
You may not have been told. Did you investigate, is my question, really, what those 2 bodies were told?
No.
Or at least one body?
No.
No. Now, let's look at Scott Hayward's statement, please. We've covered these figures, but I just want to show you the period in question. His first statement at LFB 000-55191, page 26, paragraph 74. And you can see that there's a table there, which he set out, the title of which is Table of FSG Training during 2011 to 2017. And we can see that there's the year on the left-hand side, staff, total trained and percentage trained. And in 2015, you can see that there was no FSG training at all due to the rollout of the vision system, vision training. Do you agree with that?
I haven't got the figures to hand, but that would make sense.
Right. You say you haven't got the figures to hand. I think
No.
the point is there are no figures, or rather, the figures are naught.
Then, agreed.
Right. And in 2016, 83 staff, total trained 38, resulting in 46%. Do you agree with that?
I'm not sure if this includes the CBT training that some staff undertook in that year. So I couldn't confirm that.
Well, 2016 was an even year, so would it have been CBT or would it have been trainer-led?
So, as I said, I think because we didn't undertake vision training and a CBT package in 2015, and the vision system was still extremely unstable in 2016, we explored rolling out the CBT training in 2016. I think we did more than explore it. I think we sent some emails, OST sent some emails instructing staff to complete the CBT vision FSG training.
Yes, I mean, paragraph 78.3, and I don't need to take you to this, on page 29 of his statement, Mr. Hayward says that the training spreadsheet records that a number of types of FSG-related training took place. Big learning, FSG round 3 workshops, CBT package on the Big Learning platform about procedures and practices, and then programs called FSG, Fire Survival, and Fire Survival Training, Fire Behaviour, all on Big Learning. So his evidence is that, from what he's seen, it did include CBT.
Okay.
So going back to the figure, at 2016, only 46% of staff carried out any FSG training, it appears. Do you agree with that figure?
If it includes the CBT package, then yes. I know there were a lot of difficulties with IT about some staff accessing the CBT packages, and we worked to try and resolve those.
And if we go back to page 29, sorry, we're on page 29. No, we're not. Can we go to page 29, please? Look at paragraph 78.4. He says there, by way of explanation of the figure at 2017, he says, in 2017, up to the date of the Grenfell Tower fire, no refresher FSG training had taken place, although 7 new entrants would have received the full FSG training as part of the new entrants courses ran that year. One of those entrants was on duty on the night of the fire. First, do you agree with what he says there?
Yes, as I understand it, FSG training was rolled out at the end from September to December on every year.
The new entrants programme in the early part of the year, is that right?
The new entrants would have received their training whenever they joined.
Whenever they joined.
Yeah.
And the new entrant that he says was on duty on the night of the fire, was that Sarah Russell?
I believe so, yes.
So in the round, is your evidence that the only FSG training undertaken by existing control staff in the time from when you came back from the CFOA in January 2015 and took charge of training to the night of the Grenfell Tower fire was the limited amount in 2015 and the 46% undertaken by staff in 2016?
If the 46% includes the CBT, those individuals accessing the CBT and taking part in the CU refresher training, yes.
Were you monitoring FSG training in those years, 2015, 16, 17?
Towards the latter part of 2016, yes, because I was involved with still trying to get the CBT packages updated with Babcock and LFB training, and still trying to get access for some staff because of the technical difficulties. They couldn't access Big Learning on their individual profiles. And in 2017, I was working with the training team to create a new training package to roll out in the September of that year for FSG refresher training.
Did you bring these problems to the attention of Scott Hayward or AC Brown?
Yes, Scott Hayward was aware of them.
And what about Tom George, AC George?
I don't recall in my time being in charge of OST discussing training with Tom George. But he would have been aware of them, I believe, through Scott Hayward.
Now, you've explained that in 2015 there were problems with the vision system. If we look at your witness statement, please, at page 23, your witness statement, paragraph 61, you say there at the bottom of the screen, there were considerable issues between 2015 and 2017 with the rollout of vision, which required much of the focus of the OST, as it was essential that the control room had a functioning mobilising system. What was the problem, being as precise as you can, with finding just one day of FSG refresher training in 2015, given that it was only going to be CBT that year anyway?
That we had undertaken a programme of training. I think we'd committed to train over 2,000 hours on the vision mobilising system with control staff. When the system was delayed in the mid part of 2015, we then had to undertake a programme of maintenance and training, and that was combined with additional training that we needed to provide because some of the vision system we needed to change because it just didn't have the functionality that LFB needed, and so there was additional training pretty consistently. And I think if you ask staff at a point where we went live, that they didn't feel that they were sufficiently trained. So whilst one day isn't a big ask, with the amount of changes that they were having to process, and as I've explained, it was a completely different system, something that they'd never been used to before. It was extremely difficult, and the focus and the priority was on making sure that the mobilising system went live.
Well, you keep saying that, and I can understand that, because without the vision mobilising system, pumps don't appear at incidents, I guess. Is that right?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, we can't record the caller information to begin with.
Exactly. You can't work as a brigade, and I understand that entirely, and I can understand why you say that it's a priority. But was it not also a high priority that CROs needed proper training on how to handle fire survival guidance calls, given that if one occurred, the CRO was all the difference between life and possible death?
Yes, I agree that FSG, I've always thought that FSG refresher training is a priority, but from LFB, the priority was that we trained our staff in the vision mobilising system, and we made every effort to get that live during 2015 because it had already been delayed. And that's what I spent the majority of my time working on. Staff had received some FSG training over the years, as you'd already discussed, and new entrants had received FSG training as well.
Was there any thought given, by way of some sort of lateral thinking, to any other kind of delivery of training? For example, getting all the CROs into a room at Merton, or whoever was there during the 4-hour overlap period, putting up a screen and taking them through the presentations as amended properly to reflect national guidance and the errors at Lacanal, so that they had up-to-date training in 2015, notwithstanding the vision problems?
So I think that's what we were doing constantly, training them on vision. I don't think there was a period of time where we weren't training them on vision or working out or waiting for technical enhancements to deliver yet more training on the system. But that's the role that I was asked, was to make sure that staff were trained on vision. And Scott Hayward, Tom George, Dave Brown were fully aware of the problems that control staff were facing and the shortage of staff that we had in terms of trainers delivering training as well and facilitating both the technical and training elements of going live with the new mobilising system.
Well, I can see that all these are problems, but I would suggest to you they weren't insurmountable by the process I've just identified. Perhaps a low-tech approach, getting all the CROs in a room and running them through the key points, at least those that you regarded as absolutely critical from the documents from 2011. And my question is there a reason why that wasn't thought of, let alone done, in 2015?
Like I say, the issues with the vision mobilising system, I'm probably not getting it across, were vast, and we were dealing with those. And
I understand. Now, if we look on in your witness statement, please, at paragraph 68, which we'll find on page 25, under the question, please give your view of the effectiveness of the refresher training. You deal with this on your return from the CFOA in 2015. You say, fifth line down in that paragraph, I consistently sent emails to the training team to remind them of the duty to conduct FSG training, but it became clear that the resources were not available to conduct training in the same manner that was intended in 2011. What do you mean when you say the resources were not available?
I think the number of staff in OST is what I mean by that.
So, trainers?
Yes.
Did you ask for any additional resources?
Yes.
Who did you ask?
It would have been Scott Hayward.
What did he tell you?
I probably pursued it to the point where I managed to second a number of staff from the watch into OST to assist.
number of staff from the watch? So
Yes,
those be AOMs and OMs?
Yes, yes.
How many did you second?
I believe 2, possibly 3.
And when did you do that?
In mid-2015, I think.
But in 2015, there was no FSG refresher training given at all, according to Scott Hayward's figures, because of vision training. And you've told us
Yes.
of the overwhelming difficulties with getting that system
Yes.
up and running. So why can you explain why 2015? Is it that you did that?
Is it that I asked for more staff in 2015? Yes.
When did you get any more staff? You just told us 2 or 3.
Yes.
As a result of getting more staff, did you manage to deliver any kind of FSG refresher training to CROs in 2015?
No, sorry, you've given me the figures that said no.
No.
But I think at one point, early 2015, we had, I had a conversation with OST about rolling out fire survival guidance training, and I think that was always our intention. But as the mobilising system was delayed from mid 2015, then we weren't able to deliver that.
Now, can we go to LFB 30599597? What I want to look at with you next, Ms. Smith, is an audit done by the Mayor's Office for Policing and Crime, or MOPAC. Now, the audit was conducted, it appears, in the latter part of 2014 while you were still at CFOA, but the reporting comes out in the early months of 2015. First, can you remember, when you came back from the CFOA in January 2015, were you told about the fact that MOPAC had been undertaking an audit?
No, I don't recall.
If we look at the first page of this document, we can see that in the third column there is a heading, Responsibility Senior Operations Manager Joanne Stibbards, and then a date in the next column, 30th of June 2015, and then a control comment. Our SharePoint administrator will move this to a secure area where only AOMs and above will have access and will be completed by 30th of June. First, I've shown you a bit of detail, but were you aware of this document? Did you see this document at the time, January, February 2015?
No.
Have you ever seen this document before today?
No, I don't believe so.
Right. Did anybody tell you at the time that a document like this existed?
No.
When was the first time, leaving aside the last 5 minutes, that you became aware that MOPAC had conducted an audit and had produced a document such as this?
When watching Scott Hayward's evidence, but I noticed that my name wasn't attached to it. It just said Responsibility Senior Operations Manager on that version.
Right. Did nobody tell you that a MOPAC audit had existed in early 2015, which assigned responsibility to for the actions in it to you?
No.
Can we look at page 2, bearing in mind what you've told us about this document? On page 2, in the third paragraph from the left, it says, again, Responsibilities Senior Operations Manager Joanne Stibbards. An independent record of the provision of fire survival guidance training for all control staff will be maintained and monitored to ensure that all staff are in receipt of this training at least annually. A monthly report will be produced by OST providing the annual FSG training update, and we will be directing OMs to notify the training team if individuals are nearing their annual refresher so we can get them on a refresher course. And the date is 30th of April 2015, and the last column says, completed. OST will maintain these records and notify OMs when staff are due annual refreshers, as it will be easier for us to control than the watches. First, were you aware of the finding, rating medium, as you can see on the left?
No, I don't recall that.
Did nobody ever tell you that there was a medium risk to the organisation if there were insufficient levels of FSG training?
No.
Looking at the actions, do you know whether any of them were in fact completed?
Only through Scott's evidence, where Nikki O'Shea sends an email to Scott to confirm that's been done.
Right. Now, they've clearly found that an independent record of FSG training wasn't maintained and monitored. Is that right?
I only saw the email when Nikki has emailed Scott on his request to have that completed and what she has done about it.
Did there come a time when you received monthly reports produced by OST about the annual FSG training updates?
No, I don't believe so.
Would you have expected to receive it, given your role, by that time?
No, I think that goes to show that actually individuals and different managers that were had different roles to perform would email OST directly. That wouldn't be unusual, and that they would respond to the requesting officer. So that would have been from Scott and OST.
Well, you were head of the OST by this time, weren't you?
Yes, and Scott was head of control, so he would have asked for something to be completed, and the OST team would have completed it.
Yes. And are you saying that even though there was an undertaking or promise in this that OST would maintain the records and reports as we've seen identified, you didn't know about that?
I'm not sure if I was copied into the email. I might have, but I'm not sure. It wouldn't be unusual, is what I was trying to explain, that Scott would go direct to the OST team.
Does it surprise you to learn that this was an action that needed to be carried out?
Yes.
Did you ask OMs, or did you know whether they were telling staff who were due their annual refresher training?
No, and I think in the email that you displayed to Scott, the training team and OST suggest that they would do it. So that's what I can comment on that.
So was this all completely outside your remit?
I don't recall seeing this document.
No, I know, but I mean, looking at it, it rather suggests that because you were the senior operations manager, and somebody thought it appropriate to assign responsibility to you for all this, somebody in the brigade thought it was within your remit and told the mayor's office that. Are you surprised they did that?
Yes, without telling me, yes.
I mean, some people listening to that might find that a little bit bizarre. Are you able to explain how it could have come about that this document could be created, assigning responsibility for these things to you, identifying them as complete without you knowing anything about it?
No, I can't. I've just seen a document that you showed Scott Hayward earlier, an earlier version of this, where it's just got senior operations manager responsibility and not given to a named individual. So maybe in a later version, someone thought it sat appropriately with me.
Well, let's look on in the year then, a little bit further, 2015. Can we look at LFB 000-51722, please? This is an email dated the 27th of April 2015 from Nicola O'Shea to Scott Hayward, copied to you and Chris Sharp. Subject, FSG Workshop Planner, XLSX. Looks like a spreadsheet. Hi, Scott. Please find attached the FSG workbook I have created as per the MOPAC audit. The book contains a month-by-month planner for both control staff and CUs. This will allow you to see at a glance who was trained in what month. As that month nears the following year, you will know who needs to complete their refresher. The date the actual training took place will be entered against the person's name in the relevant month. All training for control staff can then be entered onto the training recording sheet, ready to be uploaded to STEP. CU training is not entered on our training recording sheet. We email people responsible for STEP and ask them to add it to the individual officers. I've included a guidance sheet on the process for booking FSG workshops with the CU/control and completing the training recording sheet. When the next lot of FSG workshops are due, these sheets can be copied and pasted into the same workbook and relabeled to reflect that it is course number 3 and so on. Against this item in the MOPAC audit, it states that OMs are to notify OST when control staff are nearing the end of their FSG training. I believe it would be easier for OST to keep check on this, and we could notify OMs as to when people are due their annual refresher. This would also mean that the attached workbook stays with OST and no one else can access it. Can you let me know if you are happy with this? If not, I will arrange with Vic to have it uploaded to an area where control have access. Can I take it that this action is now complete on the MOPAC audit? First of all, we see that you received that email by way of a copy.
Yes.
And it refers, at least in two places, to the MOPAC audit. Did that email not alert you to the existence of that audit?
No, I don't recall that email.
I mean, if you hadn't known about the MOPAC audit, hadn't seen the audit document, can you explain why this email, copied to you, did not prompt a question in your mind, what is that?
No, probably no more. I might have asked a question, but no more than any other email someone sent to me during that time. It's clearly addressed to Scott, and it clearly looks like Scott has taken the action to resolve the action that's been awarded in that audit.
You see, you came back, as you told us in your statement, in January 15 and asked for a list of CROs whose FSG refresher training was outstanding. This, to some extent, is a process, isn't it, which would help to answer that question, at least prospectively. Were you not interested in the content of this email?
I could have been at the time, or I could have just acknowledged it that what Scott had asked OST to complete was there, and they had the intention of notifying OST, and that there was a record being kept of it.
I mean, looking at the third paragraph from the end, where she says, against this item in the MOPAC audit, it states that OMs are to notify OST when control staff are nearing the end of their FSG training. That was something which you were surely very interested in knowing about and keeping tabs on. No?
Yes, I think Nikki has resolved the problem there and said it will be easier for OST to keep a check on it, and they had committed to do that, so I would have been happy with that, yes.
Were you not interested to know what the problem was at which this solution was aimed?
Because she said it was easier for OST, do you mean?
Well, what is happening? We've read the email. Nikki O'Shea has suggested and indeed designed an FSG workbook in response to the MOPAC audit. Were you not interested to know what the problem was that the FSG workbook was seeking to solve?
No, looking through that email, it had been addressed to Scott. They had responded to an action that he had asked them to complete, and they had done that and suggested some easier solutions, it looks like to me, than the MOPAC audit had suggested. So I would have been content that OST had taken charge of that and would deliver that.
Right. What was the purpose of your being copied into this email? Do you know?
No, I don't. I see all, both Keith Diamond and myself are copied in, and we were both senior managers.
Yeah. Did you see the workshop planner as attached?
I may have clicked on it. I probably would have done that for due diligence.
Now she says, as I've shown you, OMs are to notify OST when they near the end of their FSG training, etc. And it would be easier for OST to keep a check on this, and we could notify OMs as to when people are due their annual refresher.
Yes.
Did you agree with that at the time?
If OST had thought that that would have been easier for them, then I would have supported them in that, yes.
You say you would have supported them. You were head of OST.
Okay.
Well, you were, weren't you?
Yes.
In your evidence, in your answers, I'm getting the impression that you're painting them as a different body, but they were all responsible to you, weren't they?
Yes, but I would have, as I said, I would have supported them if they'd come up with a solution that they felt would have worked better.
Yeah. Do you know whether this proposal was carried into effect?
No, I don't.
You don't know, or
No, I don't
think
know.
It was? Were you not interested to make sure that it was carried into effect, given that it had come from Nicky O'Shea, the AOM in the OST, based on an audit that you'd never heard of?
No, I would have thought that OST, if they'd said that they would deliver that, they would carried on doing that and liaising with the OMs. And that wasn't an email that I would have expected to be copied in on, an email from the training team to operations managers about individual CROs undertaking annual refresher training.
Did you take any steps at this point to ensure that OST kept a check and a record on control staff's annual FSG training?
Potentially. I can't recall, but I may have done.
Are you able to tell us why the MOPAC audit action was marked complete as at the 30th of April 2015, having regard to the fact that this email and the proposal in it is dated 3 days before that?
No.
It's odd, isn't it, that you as head of the OST would not have heard of the audit, would not have seen the audit document, and wouldn't know about what the problem was that this proposal was seeking to solve, or whether it was carried into effect. Do you agree?
No, I don't think so. I think it's quite clear that Scott Hayward, as head of department, had asked for this action to be carried out, had been involved in the MOPAC audit, and had, and this is a response to that. I wouldn't think that that was unusual. Like I say, Scott went directly to OST on occasions to complete actions.
What was Keith Diamond's role in this exercise at the time, do you know?
He was, like me, another senior operations manager.
Do you remember having a conversation with him at the time to the effect of agreeing between you that dealing with this problem and carrying out the work in this email was his domain and not yours?
No.
No. I'd like to look next at the training that was provided in these years from 2015 onwards. Did you ever speak to the OMs to find out if they were carrying out any kind of informal training?
Potentially. We may have raised that as a management team at a Brigade Control management meeting, but I can't recall.
Well, the inquiry team has seen no records of any informal training, and Scott Hayward has provided no evidence to show that informal training, such as accessing FSG policies or the RIFs from time to time, was ever undertaken in the years 2015, 16 or 17. Are you sure that there was informal FSG training during that period, or do you not know?
I would imagine that would have been kept with the individual operations managers in their watch folders.
Right. So it was left to the individuals on an ad hoc basis, was it?
Well, yeah, to the operations managers.
Did you carry out any kind of check on whether even this informal training, so accessing policies, the RIFs, perhaps some of the presentations we've seen, was being done?
So, as I said, we may have had those discussions at Brigade Control management meetings.
Do you remember discussions about delivering training in that informal way at any of those Brigade Control management meetings?
I think I do remember Scott re-emphasising to OMs their responsibility to maintain training on watch with their staff.
Right. Do you remember in which year, 2015, 2016, that discussion took place?
I don't know, sorry.
Right. So that's informal training. In respect of the CBT packages, you say at paragraph 60, as we've seen, that they were available. Let's look at paragraph 62 of your statement, where you pick up the thread in a bit more detail. Page 24. You say, there were also issues with accessing CBT packages via Big Learning. Big Learning was a platform provided by Babcock, which was designed for accessing CBT packages. As noted above, I was consistently chasing Babcock in order to get access for the control room to these packages. but due to the limitations of the LFB contract, this took a considerable amount of time, and there were problems with control staff accessing Big Learning on their PCs, which control managers also attempted to resolve. How long were you chasing Babcock for access for the control room to those packages?
A number of months. I don't think I ever got a resolution to it.
Right. Can we look at LFB 000466849? This is an email from you to Jackie Adams Bonito, if that's how you pronounce it, of the 9th of February 2016. Subject, request for old training package. And you say in the second paragraph, I wonder if you could point me in the right direction of someone that could assist us. Prior to Babcock taking over the training contract, Control commissioned an in-house CBT package for our fire survival guidance. This action came out of the Lackell inquiry, and we are trying to start this training again, however cannot locate the CBT package. Do you know who would know if this still exists or disappeared in the transfer? It may be an additional item to consider giving to Babcock as an accessible training package. Also, I'm not sure who was going to come and discuss the possibility of having some courses run by Babcock's, but no one has been in touch yet. Just wanted to make sure we were not forgotten. First, can you tell us who was Jackie Adams Bonito?
Jack Adams Bonito, I think she had moved to a training manager role in LFB, so she was part of the training contingent that liaised with Babcock's.
She was part of the, right.
The training department.
Training department, so not part of the OST?
No.
No, I understand. It looks from this that you still hadn't located the CBT, the in-house CBT, even in February 2016, had you? That's what it looks like.
It does look like that, yes.
Do you know what prompted you to send this email?
I think that we couldn't locate it on Big Learning, so we were starting to look for it.
Right. And this in-house CBT package wouldn't be on Big Learning, or would it? Presumably it wouldn't be.
I'm not sure. I think we're trying to locate it, right. Or I'm trying to locate it.
But given that Big Learning was a Babcock deliverable, you wouldn't expect it to be on Big Learning, would you?
I think control staff some control staff had access to Big Learning. I think we had the icon, and some staff could access it. It was difficulties. I know there was difficulties with certain profiles and individual profiles not being able to access it.
Yes, but the in-house CBT package wouldn't have been designed for the Big Learning platform, would it?
No, but I believe it was there.
Right.
That's why I was looking for it.
You were looking for it and didn't find it?
I think we did locate it, yes. It was on Big Learning.
It was on Big Learning. Was that, well, just to be clear, do you remember what the response to this inquiry of yours was?
No, I don't.
Do you know how long after February 2016 you got the in-house CBT package for FSG?
I think I explore it for the most part of 2016, trying to get it updated as well.
And were there problems faced by control staff accessing Big Learning on their PCs, on their systems?
Yes.
What were those problems?
I believe there was an IT problem with the profiles, their individual user profiles.
And how long did that problem persist for after you arrived back in January 2015?
A long while, and I think there was also a problem with bandwidth as well, and playing the packages.
Does that tell us that during that long while the control room staff did not have access to the CBT package at all?
No, I think like I say, there wasn't a problem with some staff. Some staff could access it and others couldn't. I couldn't tell you a percentage.
What was the difference between those who could and those who couldn't?
Individual user profiles.
Was that not something that IT could sort out?
I believe Scott had asked them to several times.
Right.
More than several times.
Do you know when you eventually got access to the CBT package?
In terms of playing it through Big Learning,
Yes.
no,
Did you ever before the Grenfell Tower fire?
I don't believe so.
You say you discussed it with Scott several times. What about anybody more senior?
No, I just would have put it through my direct line manager to pursue with IT.
Did you create an alternative training solution in the interim, given that CBT wasn't available or wasn't available to all CROs equally?
No, I think we had hoped that when we were looking originally in February, we would be able to have access and be able to update it so all control staff could undertake CBT training in 2016.
And given that 2015 was a CBT year, or originally intended as a CBT year, as one of the alternate years, and 2016 was a trainer-led year, why not simply have a one-day or even 4-hour FSG training, teacher-led, that had been planned and promised after Lacknell in that year?
I think the decision was taken that we would do a CBT package. Again, the OST team were committed to reporting faults and managing the new vision system. So that was the decision taken at the time.
At which time was that decision taken?
I would imagine by the time I started pursue looking at the CBT package, early 2016.
But why at that time did you not decide, given that you didn't even have the in-house CBT package and given the difficulties with accessing it on Big Learning, to reinstate the initially promised teacher-led training for what was an even year?
So I don't believe it was my decision in this, but I probably would have had that discussion and may have decided, or as a department, we may have decided the CBT package, due to the shortage of staff and the commitment that OST were given to the technical difficulties we were experiencing with vision, that a CBT would be preferable.
I don't understand that, I'm afraid. CBT is computer-based training.
Yes.
If the computers were causing difficulty, why prefer CBT as opposed to teacher-led training, which had in any event been what had been promised to the Lacknell House Board after the Lacknell fire?
I would have spoken to Scott and said that the resources in OST couldn't provide that, I'm sure.
You say you would have done, did you?
Yes. Yes.
You actually went to him and said, we haven't got CBT, we need to train, it's 2016, we promised it would be trainer-led, it should be trainer-led, let's do trainer-led. Was that the conversation, or kind of conversation, that you had with Scott Hayward in early 2016?
No, I didn't recommend that it was trainer-led. I would have, perhaps if we had discussed that, I would have said that the OST resources wouldn't be able to deliver trainer-led training.
But why not?
Because of the technical difficulties we were experiencing with vision and their commitment to faults and reporting faults at that time.
Right. Again, it comes back to this question of low-tech. Why not suggest a low-tech, trainer-led 4 hours, if it had to be 4 hours, so that you could at least roll out some FSG refresher training to existing staff in 2016, even if, as I say, low-tech, a slideshow from a projector on a screen? Because
that would have needed the resources from OST, and I would have raised the fact that OST were committed to supporting the control room with vision and resolving the technical difficulties we were experiencing.
Well, why not make an exception for this important refresher training, take some resources from MST, take a 4-hour slot, prepare the teacher, and deliver a 4-hour training session?
I would have only just given my opinion. It wouldn't have been my decision.
Mr. Chairman, is that a convenient moment?
Yes, I think it is. Thank you. Ms. Smith, we'll stop there for lunch. We'll resume, please, at 2 o'clock. And again, please don't discuss your evidence with anyone when they're out of the room. All right?
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. 2 o'clock, please.